2, 1.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dodie Onis. I'm an adult services librarian at Denver Public Library. Here's proof. There's my badge. I'm super happy to welcome everyone here tonight. We have close to 100 people attending. This is fantastic. It's 6:30 on Saturday, April 25th, 2020, and we are here to celebrate National Poetry Month, which has been going on since 1996, thanks to the Academy of American Poets. And joining us tonight is Bobby LeFebre and Susie Q Smith. And let me give you just a little bit of background on both of them. Bobby is an award-winning writer, performer, and cultural social worker, fusing a non-traditional, multi-hyphenated professional identity to imagine new realities, empower communities, advance arts and culture, and serve as an agent of provocation, transformation, equity, and social change. He is the youngest and first poet laureate of color in Colorado's history. And in 2019, he was also named the Colorado Theater Person of the Year. And I've got a test for you reference librarians out there. Library of Congress says that Bobby is the 9th Colorado Poet Laureate. Colorado Humanities says he's the 8th. What's the truth? Susie Q Smith is an award-winning writer and performer from Denver, as well as an artist, activist, and educator. Susie writes, performs, and teaches poetry as a tool for self-reflection, healing, and building community. Susie's passionate performance style and fearless approach to challenging content have led her to be consistently among the most well-known performing poets in the United States. And she currently serves as the co-chair on the Denver Commission on Cultural Affairs. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn the grid over to Susie and Bobby. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me and my friend this evening for an evening of poetry and conversation. This is great, right? Celebrating Poetry Month in our homes, in quarantine, and still allowing ourselves to have some sort of connection. So I'm going to get into some poems. Susie and I are going to talk. And this poem that I'm going to start with is going to kind of serve as an invocation for the event and sort of, where we're at and what we're going through. I wrote this a couple of weeks ago. It's a ghazal. Anybody who knows that poetic form, there's a line that usually repeats throughout the poem. So this is a ghazal for spring. For now, let us hang our pain and worry on the closest hook and admire the army of tulips stretching outside. It is spring. If you will, turn off the news and be still for a moment. Listen to the loud sound of silence that sings. It is spring. The coyotes and deer and bear have begun to reclaim the land. The water is clearer, the air is fresh, the fish are swimming. It is spring. Mother Earth is shedding the old like a snake, curando heridas abiertas, showing us the love in sacrifice and growth. Qué hermoso, ¿verdad? Es primavera. Chase the smile welling inside you, even if you feel it is fleeting. It is proof the sun is always at your back. It is spring. Do not walk around the promise of new beginnings as if tomorrow will foolishly repeat the mistakes of yesterday. Seeds are sprouting. It is spring. Forget not, there is a warm body in front of each shadow, a heart beating, a mind conspiring, a spirit opening. It is spring. This morning, entangled bodies made love as the cold rain fell softly outside. Physical distance morphing into metaphor, climax, equinox. It is spring. The wind is howling outside. The hood is a siren that's not sounding. I'm contemplating what will blossom from all of this. It is spring. And now I want to pass it over to my friend, longtime homie, comrade, Susie Q Smith.
Well, hey, Bobby. Thank you for that beautiful poem. I think before I jump into it, I want to know a little bit more about that poem. Is that a new piece?
Yeah, it is. I wrote it during quarantine. I might have written it on the first official day of spring. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, during quarantine.
So what drew you to that form? I'm curious.
As I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to write, I had actually read a ghazal from one of my favorite poets, Martin Espada, the night before. And I just I had the form in my mind and decided, hey, instead of just sort of starting tomorrow with some kind of free form thing, let's add some structure and do something fun.
Well, thank you. Happy
Absolutely.
National Poetry Month to you and to everyone listening this evening. So I'm going to jump into also a poem for spring. As Bobby mentioned, we've been friends, comrades, allies for a very long time, and have been writing together for a long time. So it's wonderful that we both have these new spring poems. So this one is called A Song for Red Mornings in Spring. Let this be the book of the rooster, of the eastern sky, call of the robin breast, of the drained morning and hordes running. Let it be the wind at backs and feet stirring. Let it be unstoppable, a wave, a high ground seeking, a knowing, a beginning as much as an end. Let the trees fall where they must, flying back behind a flooding ground, an answer of blue sky coming. Let me know how and keep knowing. Trust these hips and feet to move forward, even unwavering. Let the sun rise and see me soaring. Let me be forgiven for all I leave at my feet, for all I cannot carry or convince. Let me keep running until I get there. Let me get there.
Love it. So I think that, Sonia Sanchez once said, to be a good poet, you have to be a good dreamer. And this, for me, is a poem of arrival, right? And for us dreamers, as fighters, so much of our vision, I guess, lies in hopeful imaginary, right? This hopeful imaginary of the future. And I think for you, Susie, this, I don't know, I guess, is hope and poetry a defense mechanism, or is it a tangible step on the ladder of better tomorrows?
I think it's both, right? I think that it's really important that we don't allow our imaginations to atrophy, right? I don't know how victory is possible if we can't imagine what victory looks like, if we can't feel that in our bodies, if we can't be connected to the emotion of that joy and that sense of relief, of something better coming. And it's very, very difficult for us to believe it's real. And when you don't believe it's real, it's difficult to invest any energy towards it. And so I think that all of those things are incredibly important. And it's really important that we imagine ourselves liberated, that we imagine ourselves victorious, that we imagine ourselves in the future, right? That we imagine ourselves existing beyond where we are right now. And so without that imagination, it's very, very difficult for any sort of change or transformation to occur.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that so much of what we try to do is create those spaces, right, of freedom and liberation. And what we're doing here tonight and what poets do all over the world is ancient, right? This next poem I'm going to read speaks to that. It speaks to why we do what we do. It's also sort of a prayer, and it's called An Exercise in Ritual. We gather here together in this sacred circle like we always have, here around this fire that has always burned, the same fire that lives in our bellies and makes an inferno of our hearts. This spirit we summon, this beauty we conjure, this inventiveness we invoke. What is a vessel but a carrier of the coveted, a transmitter of quintessence, a conduit of culture? Come and meet us at a place where ritual is given a body, where ceremony is given a face, where our existence transfigures into a song we warble in unison. For he who sharpens his imagination is a visionary. She who gives shape to intuition is a prophet. They who hone mortality beseech the immortal. Look at what we are building together. We, the masons of reimagining, the architects of metamorphosis, the repositories of our collective consciousness. Blessed be the makers, the ones who set themselves ablaze willingly to warm the masses, the ones who traverse the unknown, giving life to the unseen. Join us as we turn ourselves inside out. Watch as we illuminate what kindles inside our bones, these places where we find and lose ourselves at the same time. These messages we devise with purpose, these aesthetics we mold from the supple clay of our minds. Join us at these holy places of abandon, these playgrounds of ingeniousness, these geneses of more inspired tomorrows. For who does not admire a flower unfolding? Who does not feel the warmth of the sun shining boldly upon their face? Whose feet do not move at the coaxing of the drum sound? Come and meet us at a new juncture where expression devoid of consciousness is merely decoration, where art is an insistent incubator for justice, where equity and access are an altar we decorate with the flowers and promise of purpose. For what is it to highlight the margins but to attempt to balance the scales? What is a raised fist but a war cry in the language of the purposely silenced? What is dissent but an innate aversion to the confines of the status quo? Art and culture is a communal land that does not know borders, a common language we are all born speaking fluently, a right that has been paraded around as a privilege for far too long. Come and help us rip the esoteric from the sky. Let our hands reach for the stars, grasp them, and share their tangible glow with anyone drawn to their light. And here we will all shine and wander together. Here we will eradicate all of the man-made barriers we impose upon one another. This beautiful burden we carry, this responsibility tethered to our pens, paint, pirouettes, and percussion, this work, this digging, these hands unearthing the truth, this joy, this beauty, this struggle, these songs, these testaments, these heirlooms, these markers of humanity that remind us that we are here, that we are alive, that we always have been, and that we always will be.
That was beautiful, Bobby. I keep forgetting that it's just the two of us talking right now. And so I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings. And so a lot of applause this way. And I realized oh, I'm allowed to speak right now and come off of mute. That piece was absolutely gorgeous. And it makes me think about, in times, a lot of times, right? In times of trauma, in times of crisis, in times of challenge, I think that we both are people who are artists and also deeply, deeply engaged in community and activism, right? So how do you feel, like, what do you want your poems to do in the world, right? I think is my question for you. What is your hope? If you're like planting them out as seeds in the world, what would you like them to do?
Yeah, I think they're also different and they all serve a different purpose. Sometimes they're a war cry, sometimes they're a celebration, sometimes they are soft and tender, sometimes they are not. And so I would love to be relevant everywhere I go. I would love to make genuine connections with people. I would love people to connect to these words in a way that makes them see something in themselves, in their communities. And I think that poems are great places for that. They're great places to hold those emotions, those feelings, those conversations. And if anything, that's all I would like to do is spark conversation and to move things forward and to talk about things in a way that brings some sort of resolution to the crazy world that we live in.
Do you remember the first time you saw yourself in a poem?
The first time I saw myself in a poem was my freshman year in college. It took that long for me. I had one of the OGs is one of my professors, Lalo Delgado, who's a veterano Chicano poet that mentored so many of us, that left a legacy of poetry in us. And it wasn't even a poetry class, it was an intro to Chicano studies class. And he used poetry, of course, in everything that he did. And he, first day of class, performed Stupid America, which is one of his quintessential, poems. And for the first time, my first semester of college, not knowing what the heck I was doing, how I was gonna, be there, that made me feel like I was gonna be okay. And so Lalo's words resonated with me. And that was the first time that I really saw myself, one, like maybe able to do this, and two, sort of given permission to exist the way that I am.
It makes me happy. I remember when the school that you went to for undergrad had huge billboards up all over the city and bus ads. that included your face. And
Yeah.
I just would smile every time, like, hey, there's my friend Bobby.
Yeah,
Here we are,
that
right?
was fun.
So I love thinking about you having that connection to Lalo Delgado, and then like how many kids around Colorado are going to have that connection to you, right? Because representation is so key. I was very lucky to have Maya Angelou. And also my great grandfather was a poet, but in mainstream world, right? I got to see myself in poems in some places, but I didn't see poetry very many places, right? Outside of my soul. Even as a teenager, when I told people like, "Oh, I'm gonna be a poet when I grow up," and they were like, but what are you gonna do for like money though?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's a strange position to be in. So Bobby and I worked together with Kristen Adele Calhoun and Such and Carrie Joy last October to bring Denver a new festival called Interfest, right? And it was an exploration of ideas and liberation. The weekend festival in which we got together and explored all kinds of arts, had incredible community conversations, and I got to lead a writing workshop that Sunday morning. Typically, I don't like to lead a writing workshop with prompts that I haven't used myself, but because I was wildly busy, I hadn't been able to take myself through the prompts that I created for Interfest. So I was writing with the group that morning and hoping it worked. Right? And so from that prompt came this piece that I'm going to read to you now. And it's really about, again, imagining ourselves in the future. So this is a little bit of time travel, and the piece is called We Sang Ourselves Free. We didn't always know we would win, just that we would do whatever we had to in order to get free. We used to sing softly to each other, to ourselves, hum low under our breath to remember our voices in places we were unwelcome. We danced in secret. We laughed silently across rooms, taking our quiet joys and tucking them into our pockets like perfumed handkerchiefs we could smell later when we needed to remember. Our foremothers and forefathers built a bridge of sound and hope that only a few could hear. We heard their call from the heavens, though, and we answered them all. We answered, becoming flesh and voice and song. If you listen closely enough, you will know how beautiful we are. Someone tried to stop their music, the love they found each other in, tried to turn them into silence, as if there could ever be less than furious messengers of a love lived out loud. Everything we do is song. We are a dance unsilenceable. One day, we saw the first rose bloom in years when we sang the low notes we'd been singing since before time had a name. We got louder. More people joined in the song, and the grasses awoke from their slumber. The wolves came and sat at our feet, weeping. The rains came down, and the trees remembered us. We began again and we knew God was listening. And the rains came the way they come, slow and sweet at first, washing the old ash and dust to the rivers. And then again, there were rivers where we washed our hands and feet, where we washed each other's hair, where we sang our old songs and the earth heard answering in heather and pine. And she answered in the day's harvest, yellows spiraling into violets, sweets wrapping themselves in spicy oranges and fuchsias, tumbling over each other to embrace the sour and soft fruit of each other. We ate and grew fat again. We all fell madly in love and raised perfect children, the sort of perfect that brought us into each day laughing. We grinned, rich as noonday, each of us carrying the songs and teaching them to the children, how to stretch a note all the way into fingertips until the trees begin to sway. You feel that? We said to each other, our hairs standing to answer the electric air. Yes, we all answered, yes.
Yeah, I think I did this program through the Intercultural Leadership Institute, and we brought together leaders of color from different communities. So we studied in Lakota territory, we studied in the Black South, in the Mexican Southwest, and in indigenous Hawaiian cultures. And one thing that I've realized is, in this poem for me, just kind of hit this place in me of what it means to be an unrelenting survivalist, you know, and our cultures, our people have endured so much. And in this poem, I heard so much about historical trauma, resilience, and that survival in the flesh, sort of manifesting into what we do here, honoring the ancestors, honoring the places we come from through ritual and culture and song. And one thing, Susie, that I think that you do so well in most of your work, in a lot of your work, is you evoke this sort of armed tenderness, right? Um, so I guess how and why do you craft tenderness that sort of also seems to wear brass knuckles and carry a razor underneath its tongue? Why is that an approach that I feel you employ?
Thank you for that question. I think I think the answer is that I can't help it. That's actually who I am. Someone told me recently that they found me to be aggressively optimistic. I also had a student say that they didn't want to come to my class that day because they didn't feel like being a better person. So I feel like I evoke a lot of things. And I think that it's probably true. I am aggressively optimistic, and I do carry a lot of tenderness and warrior energy. And so all of that shows up in my work. I think that everything that I make is out of this abundance usually, right? I mean, there's some I create from like both the void, you know, and the excess, right? So oftentimes though with poetry, it's the excess in which, you know, I'm just feeling things so deeply and so big that I can't contain them anymore. And so that they just all spill out. And so that's just like, it's an explosion of all my feelings. There's a lot of them. And so, and that is, you know, that's love, and it's tender, and it's rage, and it's all of those things together. And I think also when we think about the way that, you know, that mother bear sort of experience, you know, and the way that we very fiercely protect what's most dear to us, right? So I'm going to guess that that's something to do with like how my work shows up in the world.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote from our current national U.S. poet laureate, Joe Harzo, first indigenous person to hold that title. I believe it was an interview maybe that she had with someone where she said that, and I'm paraphrasing to some degree, but she said that a poem is a place to hold things that the heart might not be able to. And so it's this ability to hold all of these things in this beautiful encasement of words, right? And I think that that's so much about what we do, and you bringing in these experiences and looking at the past and the future, and also seeing yourself and your people and our people in the future is really, really important. I love that.
We have to imagine ourselves in the future. I mean, I think we, and especially in times now, so many crises, right? You know, when I think about, you know, so like the collection I'm working on now, the poems for the end of the world, right? I didn't start writing those during this pandemic. I started writing them last year, right? So there were already a lot of like world endings then, right? Like we had, the whole world was on fire, right? Like the Amazon, like the, you know, it was burning. There's so many different indicators, right? I think that every year we could kind of look at and point to. And then also though, when you study people, and I was raised in a pretty religious family and household, so there were always stories of like the world ending, right? And then when you start looking things up, you realize like, oh, like every generation has a world ending. Like everyone thinks it's the end all the time, right? And has always thought this. So I think that's really important to consider, that like even world ending is a part of our history, right? As people around the globe, right? We all have like this sort of, that's also part of the inheritance, right? And then surviving it is the inheritance, right? So I have to assume and believe and imagine that there's a future, right? And that includes humans.
There's a lot of indigenous Mexican stories of the earth, you know, being reborn, and how we took different iterations from, you know, mud to wood to, you know, the bodies we occupy now. And I think that that'll always be a conversation that we have around what it means to not only, you know, die and reinvent ourselves, but realizing that that can happen, you know, on a rolling basis. And I think that, of course, in these times we're tasked with, you know, figuring out who we're going to be on the other end of this. And it's important to pay homage to what came before and look forward to the future. This poem I'm going to read now sort of talks about that. I was in Crestone recently for the Crestone Poetry Festival. This town in the San Luis Valley hosts this amazing poetry festival, and it's always good to be in the valley, you know, to go home. And so I was able to write a lot while I was down there. It's such a beautiful place at the hills of the mountains, and I wrote this poem in a workshop there, and it speaks to my connection to the Southwest and particularly the Valley. It's called Right Here. I have ancestors buried in the San Luis Valley at Los Cerritos Cemetery, where the Rio and the red-winged blackbird and the crushing rock beneath the tires of our pickup truck is the only sound, where the tall swaying grass hums as its golden body moves in unison like a choreographed number beneath the vast and unending sky. I wipe away the dust that is gathered atop the black and white photo on my great-great-grandfather's tombstone, something my dad swore he was going to chip out one day but never has. Bored kids use them for target practice, he would say, but maybe it was only him who did that as he pranced through the eternity of the llano as a child. Manasa, the pueblito where my grandparents worked and fell in love, still has no stoplights and life moves slowly as the chile simmers on the stove. My great uncle tells me stories of adobe and the acequias that once carried water like sacrament to the land. Tells me his father herded sheep for people who looked like us but had money. Tells me that we come from people with names like Cipriano, Liberato, Creoltile, Macrobio, and Teodoro. He talks of the Spanish the gross way the textbooks do, ignoring the tamales steaming in the kitchen and the braids his mother wore like survival down her back. He tells me that we come from people whose hands were not afraid of the earth, people who relied on prayer. How my grandfather, a penitente, would bind cacti to his back, whip himself with the disciplina, asking his God for pity. How does this not make sense when the mountains in the distance are named after the blood of Christ? I have watched the river in Los Brazos perform miracles Christ-like, feeding more men from its belly than one can imagine there on the bank where we know much of bread and fish. The tecolote in the tree stares down at us like an elder who has seen yesterday and knows about tomorrow. Its calm and poise a testament to the lessons of the land. This land of conflict and culture, where people old as the sun once roamed freely before swords and armor and land grants, where the wind had a voice and the ears listened. Mexico, Nuevo Mexico, and El Valle de San Luis are the same body. The migration back and forth before imaginary lines is ancient, so when they ask us where we are from in that way we know all too well, we simply point to the soil and say, right here.
Oh, I love that poem, Bobby. That's so beautiful. Makes me really happy and warm. Also, you know, my mom is from the San Luis Valley, so I've got a lot of family like Hey Lahara. Got some family in the way that they pronounce it is Del Norte.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There's
Del Norte, Monte Vista.
That's how it works. I don't know if you remember this, Susie, but maybe 10 years ago, you and I and Matt Zambrano, who's another amazing poet and actor, we attempted a group poem about the San Luis Valley that we never finished. So maybe that's on our test.
I still got that writing, yes, because when we all discovered that we were probably play cousins somewhere way back, you know, and I think his people were Antonito, right? So yeah, like a lot of San Luis Valley connection there. So, and we all, I remember like having this moment, like thinking about the way the air smells there, the way it feels, and it's very specific, and it's just something that you know. When you spent your summers playing in tire swings there, like whatever it is. So, and the way the dirt roads sort of cling to your legs. So yeah, let's finish that at some point. But one question I have for you is, in so much of your poetry, there's just a profound respect and tenderness for nature, right? For the trees, for the birds, for all of these natural elements around you. And yet you grew up on the north side, right? Which is like not necessarily, I mean, right now though, like I know that you've seen some wildlife in your front yard, but typically, right? So tell me, how do you normally like access nature, and how does that make its way into your poetry? Like, you hang out in the mountains a lot, or do you just like chill on your porch?
Yeah, nature. So one thing that I'm grateful for is my parents actually used to send me to the valley every summer. So from the time I got out of school, from the time I was maybe 12 years old to maybe 16 or 17, my parents would send me there pretty much every summer, and I would be immersed there, helping my uncle on our land. But in addition to that, I travel a lot, and I've been blessed and privileged to see a lot of different landscapes, a lot of different countries and nature, and hear different birds in the morning. And growing up, my dad was an avid fisherman, and he loved to be in the mountains. Him and my mom did that, throughout the time that they dated, from the time that they were kids to now. They still like to get out and get into nature. So my dad exposed me to those things. My parents took me, fishing and camping, and I learned a lot about the land that way. So some of it I got, honest through family involvement, some through, travel and learning. And it's not something that I do a whole lot these days, but when I do it, I always ask myself why I don't do it more. So that connection to me, lives here, and I have to really push myself to get out, in the context of the crazy life I live now.
So what's the thing you miss most right now about going outside?
About going outside. I miss just walking down the street and not have somebody look at me like I'm the blob, we're doing this weird thing socially where like we're afraid of each other in the grocery store aisle. We are avoiding each other on purpose in a hella specific way, distance. And so I guess I'm already mourning the loss of intimacy that we're gonna have to relearn in throughout this process, whenever we are able to get back to some resemblance of that spatial intimacy that we once shared without concern.
I think, yeah, I miss the woods.
No.
I feel like pretty soon I might go to the woods, but it's one of those things too, like living the life that I live. I'm not afforded many opportunities to like go run up into the hills. So I think that's a thing that I'm going to change this year. Like I'm really, really missing, like just putting my feet in a river, or just like chilling in some wood somewhere. Cause I think that's really important to do sometimes. But yeah, I think that a lot of my poems are informed by the nature that I remember, the nature I imagine. Right? But like there's a rooster not far away from me, and so that shows up in it's like neighbors about half a block away. So like I live in the city. I think roosters might be illegal in the city, but I hear this rooster in the mornings, like like sit on the porch with my coffee when the weather's nice, and just like sort of write a little bit, and that's my being in nature when I'm really like in a Cole Clayton neighborhood. But there's nature everywhere, right? And that's one of the things I'm finding right now is like hearing all these stories about the wild reclaiming cities in small ways, right? So I think a lot of us saw that video of, it was a groundhog like just hanging out with a piece of pizza, looking at the dogs through the glass door, or many stories of chickens just like walking around city blocks, just sort of taking things over. So there are so many things that I think of, just like seeing how nature is coming to us when we cannot go to it. But I think also like, we're both born and raised in Denver and have spent our lives here and have witnessed a lot of shifts in this city over the last 10, 20, 30 years, pretty dramatically. So I thought that I would share this poem tonight. And I'm excited because I can share my screen and show you the poem. Because this poem is, I also like to explore forms sometimes. And so this is the contrapuntal poem, meaning that it's a term from music, right? So this is a poem that is written in columns. And hopefully I can share my screen with you. And you see this poem read to you. And so it's meant to be read each column down and across. Typically how it goes. That's showing up on the screen for you. And so The poem is about my experience in my city. It's also about so many cities. It's not unique to Denver, right? Cities all over the place are changing pretty dramatically. So these are some of the changes from the city that I experience now versus the city I grew in. It's called We Pay Cash for Houses. Front yards with grass, old trees and shrubs. Liquor stores here got bulletproof. The church's tattered lighthouses hold all our secrets. We lost Martin Luther King Boulevard. We hum our shame and moans. Old spirituals shake the bricks. Hand-me-down houses. Delicious trees that gossip over fences. Popeye's chicken, church's chicken, laundromat check cashing payday loans. We, who know each other's names and borrow cups of sugar, $20 until payday, just until we got on our feet. And did we not get on our feet? We made this, all of this, we made it. Fresh cut, clean as first day of school sneakers, even mirrors, new banks on the block, bundles of slow plunder, but the sidewalks ain't cracked no more. The alleyways, smooth as untested promise of former corner store seedlings, looming into downward-facing dog, in parks that unwelcome children, bike lanes and boutique wine bars or family-friendly microbreweries, hear all the scents and sounds conspiring, flooding to the teeth in whispered howls, drowning in hissed welcomes, adrift the taunting memory of ground, air, made fat and wet with our breath for you, for you. Front yards with grass, fresh cut. Old trees and shiny crab apples, clean as first day of school sneakers. Liquor stores here got bulletproof glass. Even the mirrors finesse the churches. Tattered lighthouses, the new banks on the block hold all our secrets. Bundles of slow plunder. We lost Martin Luther King Boulevard, but sidewalks ain't cracked no more. We hum our shame in moans. The alleyways smooth as untested promise. Old spirituals shake the bricks of former corner store seedlings. Hand-me-down houses blooming into downward-facing dog. Delicious trees that gossip over fences and parks that unwelcome children. Popeye's chicken, church's chicken, bike lanes and boutique wine bars, laundromat check cashing payday loans or family-friendly microbreweries. We, who know each other's name, hear all the scents and sounds conspiring, and borrowed cups of sugar flooding to the teeth in whispered howls, $20 until payday, drowning in hissed welcomes, just until we get on our feet, drift the taunting memory of ground. And did we not get on our feet, air, made fat and wet with our breath? We made this, all of this for you. We made it for you.
Love it. Love it. You know, I remember, shared that poem with me. I was, blown away at, I know a little bit about talking about this topic, I guess my question for this particular poem is, what was the process for you like to compose it in that way? How intentional were you with, how you were able to write each line, and how much editing did you do to make sure that they lined up, or did it sort of happen? And talk to me about the process of how this poem came to be.
So the editing process is obsessive to make it work. There's always, every time I play with this form, there's always one word that you just wish didn't exist or did, that like needs to be the right bridge. So there's a lot of shifting and shading. The piece originally was written, I was and what you about what I
I'm going to interrupt you just a minute, Susie. You're frozen on my end. You're frozen on my end, but I can hear you. So maybe just keep going.
I hope I am frozen on a good face. If I'm frozen, I'll try and finish a good face. But so it began like sort of the two poems were written separately around like things that I felt I inherited or walked into, and then things that sort of evolved around me. And so that is like, and I realized like, oh, these are the two sides of this, and so I can't really separate them because they coexist so functionally. And as I walk through, Park Hill is the neighborhood I'm from, and so seeing like the remnants that are still very much like geographically and like truly similar, architecturally similar, However, culturally wildly different than the neighborhood I grew up in. So like, living in that, and every time that I'm in Park Hill, sort of going through that memory and what was once true and what is now true, they're so very different, which I know you know a lot about. And of course, it's much more architecturally different, right? Like specifically, your block is different than when you first moved into it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know there's a lot of poets that are talking about this issue. It's happening all over the country. And I was on a poetry reading virtually last week, and there was a poet that is writing an entire book about their city, you know, going through these changes. What would you say the poem or the poet's job is in this sort of trying to move the needle on issues that maybe require political involvement and you know policy rewritten? What is the artist's role in those arenas?
I think the artist's role is manyfold. So I'll bring Sonia Sanchez in the room again, and she's heart can't be sustainable, and so I think that's part of the artist's job, always engaging the heart, right, and making us feel feelings, because we don't know things. So it's got to be rooted in love, and artists can root things in love, right? It's also remember the truth and tell it over and over again, right? Because that's one of the things that right, is that we pretend that there was no story before, right? And of course, there's no such thing as like the new world, right? This is the entire world is made, and people have been on it living, and stories have been created this whole time, right? And so part of the artist's job, I think, is to remember for everyone else and help everyone remember, and to share those stories so that we exist together. And there's got to be that marker, right? I think is so common since people have been people, right? Urge to say like, I exist, I'm here, right? And like, I think my first one probably, you know, marking up something that just says like, I exist, and we need to have our stories remembered, our names remembered, right? And that's part of the artist's job too.
Totally. We are
How
running.
would you add to that, my friend?
I would add to that, and I think that's right. You know, a lot of the work that I do, you know, folks have asked me why I'm not interested in running for city council or something, you know, of that nature. And for me, I feel like my work and my talent and my skills and my passion and my effect, I think, lies in changing people's hearts and minds first. And I think before we see any large-scale social or political change, we see the hearts and minds of people change first, and that's what we do, I think, as poets. I want to be conscious of time because I do want to leave, you know, some question and answer stuff. We have a couple more minutes. I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about what's happening right now in our world through poems. So I'm going to share one of two of my quarantine poems, and then Susie, maybe we could end with my favorite one of yours, if I can make a request. So this is I wrote this poem, I don't know, when we first started being quarantined. And I just started, my mind always goes to who is going to need the most help always, you know, and the work that I do as a social worker, as a poet, I'm always concerned with who is being most affected with these things. And so this poem I wrote was also part of a virtual gift basket that we both, Susie and I both participated in with warm cookies. And you know what? Maybe Susie, let me ask you, Susie, what do you think? Do you want to end with the group thing, and maybe save the COVID poem?
I think that let's read the short one because we are running out of time.
So you froze on me, Susie. I didn't hear what you said. So you froze on me, Susie. I didn't hear.
I would love for you to read the poem you were going to read. I
Okay,
think let's save.
sounds good. All right, so this is one of, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 COVID poems I've written, but it's one of the first ones. The sirens are sounding, the screams are loud. The virus has packed its bags, world traveler without a passport. Borders are man-made. Walls cannot contain life on the move, but that's another story. Asian businesses were empty before streets, racism. The toilet paper is gone. Panic begets panic. My 3 p.m. meeting is now a Zoom conference. Tom Hanks is raising his hand. Let's talk about the poor. 30 million uninsured, ends meet public transportation to get there. Self-quarantine, privilege, paradox. Blue collars can't work remotely. Hourly wages, side-eye the salaried. Go ahead and cancel school. Childcare is a killer too. Industrialized without a heart, developed without a conscience. Capitalism gaslights, blames our bodies instead of broken systems. Wash your hands, cough into your sleeve. Plutocracy lampooning universal health care. Call on your God or whatever. Just don't touch your face when you make the sign of the cross.
Thank you, Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I got a little Wi-Fi interference there. Something happened. Right. Sometimes, you know, we're working through it. That's also part of our current experience, and but that's a beautiful piece. Thank you. So I'll read this short piece. Close us out, if that's all right.
Perfect.
And so this is something that I've written since being sheltered, and this is called Mezzo Sopranos Get the Sad Songs. Did you hear the one about the long lines around the gun shop and the sold out bullets and the empty grocery store shelves in the United States? What will happen when our lights are out? I hope we sing like the people in Italy. I only really know 2 arias, one of which is Lasciatemi morire, translation, bring me my death. So I don't think I'll sing that one, but I'll tell you this. I'll sing before I shoot. I'll sing before I shoot.
Perfect. You froze at the end for me, but I know the end, so it's beautiful. Dodie, Stacy, we're gonna hop into some questions. Is that right?
Yeah, hi, this is Dodie. Just a couple of comments. We've had some really lovely chat. Susie, you're making people cry. And we have a question about, does the COVID-19 poem you just read, Bobby, have a name, have a title?
You know, I'm terrible at naming poems. I usually do that very last. I remember Lauryn Hill in her Unplugged series, she said the same thing. She was like, I'm terrible at naming poems. I just call them by a line in the song usually. So on my document right now, it's called COVID-19, which is super original. But I'll probably name it at some point later.
Great, thank you very much. We also had a question about, do either of you perform or write in Spanish?
Bobby does.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I do. I have poems that are more Spanglish. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish, and I have poems about that too. But I do pepper. You know, so much of the Chicano movement taught us that reclaiming language, even if it's the language of the colonizer, was important, right? So a lot of the Chicano poets were using bilingualism in poetry in the 60s and 70s, and that sort of allowed the newer generation of us to adopt those same things. So I do write bilingually. If I'm in a country that I'm performing in that is primarily Spanish speaking, I do translate my work, either myself or with help, because it's not something that I'm super well versed in. I know once I went to Cuba and I tapped to one of my favorite writers to help me translate. His name is Alejandro Jimenez. And his poetry is amazing. So if you don't know about Alejandro, you should Google him. He helped me with some translations for some work I was doing in Cuba. But I do that when I need to. And I know, Susie, you got some stuff too. Don't forget them descansos. You're on mute, Susie.
I think that Dodie and I unmuted me at the same time. So, I think I do have one poem in particular that is in Spanish and English, because the poem is about that a bit. And the poem was specifically requested for a vigil that was being held at the ICE Detention Center on Valentine's Day. This has now been about 10 years old.
All right. A question about, we have a couple people attending from not Denver, so you have fans from far and wide. Question about how do you make your poetry unique, and what would you recommend to a starting poet?
I think part of the poet's journey is finding, and maybe not finding, but exploring and cultivating your voice. I think that a lot of us read poets that resonate with us, and in some ways we, in workshop and writing, we try to emulate them. However, I think the poet's journey is really finding and honing that voice, and when you do find it, that's what makes you unique. I think it sets us all apart in that it allows you to tap into that thing and to share that thing. And those things actually really tend to resonate with folks and allow for the most sincere.
Susie, did you have something to add to that?
Of the self, right? I think that so you experience it, right? And so it's unique, and I think that poetry is just an extension of that. Whatever your story is, yours entirely, and you own it, and it's unique. So of course we all have a lot of experiences.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Susie, your audio is going in and out. So we'll try to come back to you. We also have another question about who's the audience, or who is in your mind when you write your poems? Who do you write your poems for?
It sort of depends. When you, sometimes the audience is very specific. So sometimes I'll get hired by an organization, a company, a corporation to write something very specific. And in that, it's kind of easier. The audience is sort of tailored. I think that the minute you start writing for an audience, though, it starts to, I don't know, there's a potential for your work to be disingenuous. And so, every teacher I've ever had, every poet that I've ever studied that has, approached this topic, the advice is always to write what you know, write what your heart and your body and your mind are telling you to write. And in that, usually, again, there's some sort of string that others can, pull and help you unravel this thing that we call poems and poetry. I think that obviously there are, things I keep in mind sometimes is, especially, having the beautiful burden of being the first poet laureate of color. I think I also want to ensure that I'm always uplifting, centering, and really engaging in a real and pointed way with voices that we traditionally don't hear from, or that are silenced or marginalized on purpose. And Susie and I right now are also working on a project with some other folks of creating a conference called Margins, where we're actually going to be bringing writers together to center those voices. So if I do have an audience, it's one that has traditionally been left out of conversations, and centering and uplifting those voices.
I will echo Bobby on that. Creating, there is not audience in mind. I'm making what I need to make, and the audience is later. But always, four is really, really important to me. I think the fact that Bobby mentioned he didn't see himself his first year of college, that says a lot, right? Like, and they're properly represented in literature. So I think that that's something that's really, really important to me, to sharing my work and what makes its way out into the world. I want people who don't feel represented to feel like there's a place for them to exist.
Thank you, Susie. Also, I wanted to pass along some more kudos from the chat that you have provided an inspiration during a time when it is often difficult to get the creative juices flowing. So even though it's hard to see your audience and feel your audience, they're out there and they're feeling you. Another question, why do you think people are afraid of poetry?
I think that maybe the question is in regard to approaching it and feeling like it's out of reach. And I think that that has a lot to do with the ways in which poetry has been crafted by academia, by the gatekeepers of who determine on a national scale what poetry looks like, sounds like. And I think people may be afraid of it because it has become intellectually something intangible when the goal of poetry is communication and connection. And I think that the more writers get wrapped up in ego and trying to, you know, do impressive word tricks or alienate people by, you know, creating things that really feed the ego and not any sort of communal vision, that creates that distance, right? And I think that that's part of what a lot of us in a younger generation, especially poets of color, are doing, is we're saying that not only does poetry exist in the forms that you know it to exist, not only do the canons that you study exist, but there's a whole world of poetry that, you know, the canon ignores, you know, on purpose. There's a whole lot of aesthetics and styles and approaches to poetry that don't get counted as poetry. And we know that the more inclusive we are of those forms, the more that we will have investment and engagement. I think that that's why there's so much youth involvement with poetry right now, because, you know, performance poetry, slam poetry has been something that young people have particularly resonated with, because it allows for a safe space to, in many ways, have these first-person narrative conversations with an audience and have people genuinely interested. So I think the more we're open to what poetry is and can be, the less fear people will have about it.
Absolutely. I would say that people who fear poetry just haven't been really invited to poetry. They just haven't met poetry yet. Or they have why they would be afraid of it.
All right, I'm going to give you one more question. Susie, you mentioned Maya Angelou as an inspiration or an influencer, and you mentioned Delgado. Bobby, are there any other poets that have influenced you and that maybe our attendees can take a look at and learn from?
Want to shout some names, Susie?
Oh, absolutely. Lucille Clifton, June Jordan, Gwendolyn Brooks, Wanda Coleman, and there are many, many living poets right now who I deeply, deeply love. Like there are so many local poets. We're very rich in Denver with some brilliant poets, right? Bobby LeFebre, who mentioned also Alejandro, who doesn't live here now, but he's still ours in many ways. So I definitely recommend looking into Alejandro. There are many, many, when we're back in navigating the world again, there's open mics in the city almost every night for poetry. So I highly recommend checking out some of your local poets. And there are brilliant living poets making love every single day.
Yeah, I mean, I get the, list goes on and on. I think I was most influenced by writers that, were also mentors, people like Trinidad Sanchez Jr. I'm a big fan of Martin Espada. I love Octavio Paz. There's a whole, again, there's a whole canon of people that don't get the love that they need. Modern poets, right? Like Susie said, living poets, I think, is a good place to start. We're also seeing a huge increase in internet poetry, right? Because people are connecting with poetry in new ways. And there are poets online who have, in some cases, millions of followers. And, they're using Instagram, poets like, I don't know, friends of ours, Rudy Francisco, Christopher Poindexter has a large following online. And so they're Andrea Gibson, there's these poets that have a huge influence on people using poetry as a tool for engagement. So maybe we can create a list, Susie. We can create an extensive reading list for folks.
Well, I think it's time for us to head out of this party. And I want to thank everyone that attended tonight. Keep your eye on the main page, denverlibrary.org. And we have more virtual events coming up. Look on the left-hand side, everything from story times to craft making to you name it. We're trying to bring the library to you in all different kinds of ways. And huge thanks to Bobby and Susie for coming tonight. And thank you for your performances and for your smiling faces and for being with us tonight. Good night, everyone.